Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about effective transition from school to vocational rehab for students with autism spectrum disorders. I'm Emily Sneed. I work with Hanover County Public Schools in Virginia, and this is Lori Fouts, who works with the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services here in Virginia. We collaborate frequently as we work together in our school division, so we hope to bring you good information today. First, we'll be talking a little bit about supporting the evolution of work-ready students. And that really starts for us in school with the establishment of a team. That team is going to be inclusive of the student, obviously, and also the family, school personnel, and other players. What I mean by that is that the entire community in our particular area, it's extremely important to us to make sure that all of our stakeholders are a part of the process. Students certainly do much better in school and once they exit school if they have cooperation and support from all the team members around. And so the establishment of that team is our first step. The next thing that we do is we work to start getting to know the student and the family's needs. That certainly includes transition type assessment that happens in the school building, but also community activities that help us get to know what the student is about, what they're interested in, and what their support needs might be. That's a collaboration. That's really where the collaboration begins with us and vocational rehabilitation from the school side, because Lori is inherently involved in all of the meetings and discussions that take place around getting to know students and getting to know their support needs. The next thing that's really important for us in our area is planning for systematic steps towards the goal. You know, talking about what a student is good at and what they're interested in is only as good as that conversation if a plan of action doesn't come out of that discussion. The plan of action is oftentimes an IEP, but it oftentimes also includes many other players that aren't necessarily a part of the school team. So that's very, very important, and that certainly is a step in supporting that student towards work readiness. Moving towards transition, the assessment and evaluation of the student's performance certainly is ongoing throughout their high school career, really even beginning before that. We typically begin the transition assessment processes when a student turns 14, and it continues on up through the time they exit school, and sometimes even beyond that. The evaluation of the student's performance really is speaking directly to how do we determine what their productivity is like. What is their stamina like, and we look at that through many different lenses, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Another thing that inside of the school is extremely important for us to do is looking at instructional alignment. Students have the opportunity to take classes that go, you know, the full range from 9th grade through 12th grade, standard academic classes which are available to all students with or without disabilities. Electives that are available to students with or without disabilities, and also specialty type programs related to work readiness and social skills in the workplace. Those are available as well. And so we look at those particular pieces towards the student's plan and ensure that each student that has weaknesses or needs in those areas are tapped into those particular classes. We also have a large continuum of transition activities. Again, beginning at about age 14, we start getting to know the student and doing transition assessment. That is paper-based as we begin, and then moves into more practical application as it becomes age relevant for the student. So you'll see we start with the school-based activities. We want to know whether or not a student is proficient in the activities of daily living, activities of work readiness within the school building before we're applying that to outside of the school building. Okay, and so that may look like inside of a classroom, a student being introduced to a certain work activity, then being given the opportunity to practice that activity, and then us measuring their proficiency with that activity. From there, we build on those skills. So once we know how a student does, and let's just use the example of putting together a tray for our cafeteria, for any standard school cafeteria. You know, everyone has different ways of putting those things together. I'm just using that because it's a quick example, not because it's one that we really do very frequently. But we would first teach the student the skill that we want them to learn and then assess around that. Then we would expect them to do more as they have more experience with that task. And then we'd look at moving that skill out into the cafeteria where it is naturally completed. From there, a nice transition might be to connect with Lori if the student is at the appropriate age and have that vocational rehabilitation piece work around to provide some community activities that could go with that as well. So it's just sort of a really quick example of how we go from within the classroom to out into the community as an experience and then out into the community as a work site. From this point, when we are getting to know a student in the school and we recognize that the student is going to have some needs longer term, and again, with the collaboration of my partner here, we talk about students and what their needs might be long term. Once that conversation begins and the family's involvement becomes a part of it, then we start really talking about how to make a referral to our vocational rehab agency. And often that begins with our counselor coming into the schools and working with us, answering calls from families about what types of services might be available, talking with families about eligibility requirements, and then working with the school staff to determine what has been done previously that supports that transition. Obviously, age and disability classifications are a part of that as well, which goes into eligibility a little deeper, but that's really where the conversation starts. And communication is just a small way to sort of express what has to happen. In our area, we're extremely fortunate because our Community Services Board and Vocational Rehabilitation and the school division work together and create a systematic process for students to transition. The conversation begins in the school. For students that have case management services through the Community Services Board, often their case managers are involved from early on, in some cases in our county as early as elementary school. And so the players know each other well. Mm-hmm. By the time we are all getting together at 14, 15-ish, the team is becoming very solidified, and there's communication, free-flowing communication between all members of the team. One special thing that we have done in our area that I think could be helpful to others is that we set up a systemic way to move kids from one location to the other. For instance, every September we get together and talk about students who will be exiting in June with our Community Services Board, with Vocational Rehabilitation and the schools, and we name those students and we talk about what records do we have, what records do we need, what do we need to do in terms of helping the eligibility process for either waiver services or through DRS or voc rehab for us. So that starts really early on, and then after that meeting in September, the transition teachers in our school division continue to work with the staff at the Community Services Board and with Lori to ensure that students, young adults, are handed off to someone that they know and that knows them. And so that makes for a really nice transition. In addition to the September meeting that we typically have 3 or 4 meetings a year to talk about students in which directions they're heading. Some of them are headed towards supported employment, and we know that early on, and we share the transition activities that have taken place in the school building. Community assessments that have taken place, paper-based assessment, any information we have, we certainly share with our team members. So as that's going on, each member of the team is obviously getting to know the student a little bit better as to what they're going to need and what their family has an interest in long term. As you can see, our services are discussed beginning at the IEP meeting at age 14. There are times when family members, particularly moms, have questions about when a student, what type of services the student may be eligible for as an adult. The school helps to just sort of introduce vocational rehabilitation, and the Department of Aging and Rehab Services in our area, we help to make that introduction. And then if they're asking questions prior to age 14, we give them Lori's phone number. Mm-hmm. I have her business cards in my business card holder, so that if someone asks for information, it can be given to them immediately. And it is just a really seamless discussion. I think the same, you'll probably hear the same from her, that if there are questions related to school, that she just refers those back to me. So the official referrals for our students tend to happen around age 16, if not before. Again, if it's a very involved situation, we typically get Lori involved early on to make sure that the family and the community services board and the schools, that we're all working together in the same direction. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk a little bit more about, or I'm sorry, I'm going to back up and talk about sharing of information, which we've talked a little bit about already, but just to clarify, we do share information between the two agencies in IEP meetings, through IEP case managers. Also, when we're at our scheduled meetings with Community Services Board and DRS, we all work together in sharing information. We certainly ensure that the information we are sharing comes from, signed consent forms. I say that because I just assume that we all operate from that framework. After that consent is signed, we share information that we create on an ongoing basis. It happens by phone, it happens by email, it happens, in face-to-face meetings. The meetings that are scheduled throughout the year with the School and Community Services Board and DRS team, we've talked a little bit about that, but I just want to reiterate that's something that we do in our particular area that has worked very, very well, and our students with ASD are exiting school and becoming employed. The indicators for our school division show that about 93% of our students 1 year after exit from school are involved in either a work program or in some sort of educational program. So, what we're doing seems to be working really well. Again, we're sharing the documents that are created by the school district. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk about how students get referred to vocational rehab, or in Virginia, the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services.
Thanks, Emily. Most of my referrals come from the school IEP case managers, and they are the ones who tend to know the students the best and can fill out the forms to let us know who the student is, when they may be graduating, what type of diploma they're working on, and some other parameters that help us to start to shape the case a little bit and figure out what might be needed or what initial questions the team and the parent may have. Other referrals may come from the 504 plan coordinator at the school, also from the Community Services Board, either someone on the team there with the mental health community or therapists there. And then we do have some folks who are self-referred or parent-referred. And sometimes that does happen, as Emily mentioned, with younger students. If they are 14 or 15, typically what I will do is consult with them and have a phone conversation, or possibly come to the school to meet them briefly to talk about what voc rehab might look like as they get older. Typically, in those cases, the parents are just very concerned about what the future is going to hold, and they're not familiar at all with what the service model is and if there's going to be something for their student. We do have a referral form that the schools use that they send to us at voc rehab, and it does have an embedded release of information, so that way it's easier to make sure that we are covered when the referral is made, that they've already provided consent. And once we've gotten the referral of the student, it tends to come through two major channels. One would be either during an IEP meeting that I've been invited to attend, and those are great when I can be there because everybody's already at the table. Our whole team is there, the teachers are there. If there are other agencies involved, such as the Community Services Board, I'm going to get to meet everybody all at once, and also get to kind of see the family dynamics a little bit, and just hear a lot of detail about what's going on at school. If it does not happen during an IEP meeting, then I would make a contact by phone once I've gotten the paper referral and initiate a contact and try to start to develop a little rapport with the family and figure out whether we should go ahead and schedule an intake meeting or whether there may be an IEP meeting coming up very soon. And if there is, I would offer to attend that. And from there, we really need to start a discussion of what types of services the student is going to need and when is the appropriate time or what year in school we would actually start that. And I would also want to hear more about what their student is interested in doing and make some suggestions on where they might go to get those skills. And as we know from working with students, a lot of times the job goals are not realistic, or they may be jobs that are not entry-level jobs. And so we do need to do quite a bit of education and make suggestions on where they might start out or where they might volunteer, or what kinds of even entry-level jobs could potentially lead to skills in those areas and build the resume. So we start talking about that from the first meeting to make sure that the focus is on employment. And then finally, we would make sure we've completed an intake appointment, and that would include all the consent forms being signed and covering the client's rights as a client. All right, and then once that intake has been completed, we have a few things to do that are behind the scenes, so we try to make sure that the family and the student and the teachers know to contact us if they should need something in the meantime, because they may not see me right away as I'm gathering the documents for eligibility. And with our school system, we have a very good working relationship where I don't have to wait at all to get records. They come very quickly. Sometimes I'm provided with a copy of those during an IEP meeting. But we often have to send for other records from medical professionals or mental health professional or someone that's outside of that system, and it can take time to get those records. And we do try to encourage families to let their provider or counselor know that a request is going to be coming from a voc rehab agency and to please expedite whatever they can to us so we can start planning. And also, we're going to be discussing kind of really, I think, Emily, with our school system, even as those paper referrals were coming in or the first phone contact or email where we want to discuss a potential referral, to make sure that our voc rehab agency is going to be a good fit for that student, that what the parent or what the student is looking for is something that we are able to do, because we are not in the business of housing. We can make referrals to the appropriate agencies, and we also do not provide crisis services. But we need to look at disability barriers, and are those already documented, or if not, how do we get that done? What testing or evaluation may need to happen? And looking also at, can the student benefit from our services? Because we have, of course, a wide variety and wide range of students and different abilities and interests. And we need to kind of look at, are they interested in competitive employment, or are they not quite ready for that yet? Is the parent on board with competitive employment? We kind of need to have early discussions about that, because the school system is such a wraparound environment and a safe harbor. And once you look at leaving that setting and going to work, where even if you had a job coach, they would eventually fade away, and your student is going to be on their own at the job site, we need to start talking about that early, what that might look like. And is that feasible right now, or are there other services that should be put in place prior to that? Okay. So with service planning, assuming we've gone through our referral and our intake and we've done our eligibility and found our student eligible for services, we want to look at some tentative goals and career clusters. And very early, again, start encouraging the student and the parent and also the teachers that we're interacting with to look at career clusters rather than one job title. We tend to get bogged down sometimes with a job title that a student may want to do, rather than looking at the umbrella of related occupations and ways that you can get experience and other things that they may enjoy. In this market, as tight as jobs are, we need to really encourage our folks to be as flexible as possible and to do things that are going to build their resume, rather than sit and be idle and wait for the best thing to come along. We want to encourage them to take those career steps little by little and to have some flexibility there. And then we're going to look at, with our service planning, what services are needed for the student to accomplish this goal and move towards that direction. Very frequently with vocational rehab, people will come to us with an idea already in mind of something they would like to see happen. They would like to take college courses, or there may be a particular program they want to participate in. So we do need to take time to educate and look at what would be the outcome and the benefit of that service. Is it a good fit? Is there funding available? And also, is it going to end up in competitive employment? Is this something that's going to be on our career ladder, or something that maybe would be enjoyable and a great experience but isn't really vocationally necessary for them to reach their goal? That some of those items that are nice but maybe not critical to the employment plan, the vocational rehab agency, DARS, may not be able to do as far as funding. Families are always able to go ahead and do those things on their own if they would like to. We're not going to prohibit anything like that, but we may not be able to add financial participation to that from voc rehab dollars. So you can see on your screen there are several things there for what types of services are possible. And then the funding, which is a very key piece. We do have some services that are of no cost. And those things are primarily offered in-house by our Voc Rehab agency. There would be things including assessments that are always done at no cost for us to gather more information about students, their interests, their abilities, and what their support needs might look like, and also to give them a chance to be out in the community and try out different types of work and to see up close and personal what a job is really like versus what they perceive it as from maybe seeing it on TV or hearing about it somewhere. It might sound like a lot of fun, but there may be hidden parts of the job that they're not aware of, and so we want to make sure they're really immersed in that. So guidance counseling also falls under no-cost services. We may spend some time in the career lab, either at the school or it might happen at the vocational rehab office, where we can use things like Virginia View, which is one of our local career information sites with updated labor statistics, and do some education there. Other things under no-cost services would include some job readiness skills such as mock interviewing, preparing to cold call. It might be practicing how you would ask for information on the telephone or walking into a business and what do you say, even practicing the handshake. So lots of those things that we can do. Resumes and so forth, and also helping with online applications in our career lab, because that is pretty much the way things are headed now. There aren't as many paper applications out there, and it can be really tricky to submit an application online and make sure that it went through properly and that it represents your student well and looks the way that it should look. And there are a few places where we can locate comparable benefits, and one of the main ones that comes to mind is federal financial aid for students who are looking at going on for more vocational training for skills or possibly 2-year, 4-year colleges. And that is required under our vocational rehab policy that they do seek out comparable benefits under the federal financial aid program and the FAFSA form that's located online before they ask for any funding to try to seek through the local state agency. Another example might be the family. We do have a financial needs test. I'm sure every state has their own, where we're going to look and see based on the tax form where the student is claimed. If they're no longer claimed, then it's a different story and we can look at them as a family of one. However, if the family claims the student and the income level is higher than what we can allow for our funding, then it may be that a family may take over part of the cost of that service, or we may need to go back to the drawing board and find something else that we can do or offer, or find something that they can pay for out of pocket that's going to have a more reasonable cost but still get them to their employment goal. And then finally, and honestly the most important, is the service plan. The items that we're looking for funding for have got to have the vocational necessity. Again, enrichment can be a wonderful thing, and there are lots of great programs I know in our area. However, for DARS, our Voc Rehab agency, to provide funding, we have to be able to tie those services directly back to a vocational necessity, that they cannot do without that in order to get to their job goal. If it's something that's more for enrichment and enjoyment, the family may want to pursue that on their own if it's very important to them, but it may not be something that goes into our service plan as funded by the DARS agency.
I'd like to sort of bounce back into one thing that you addressed, Lori, and that was the student's goal being to work competitively. That's something that we both focus on a lot. We have families, many families and students who have, splinter interests. For instance, perhaps working in a coaching type environment with a sports team. That's a very common interest of many of our students, where there aren't a whole lot of competitive jobs for folks who haven't played those sports in at least a collegiate type of team. When those requests come in, it is the responsibility of the school district and also of vocational rehab to sort of talk about how can we get that student interested in something that may be around that area but not necessarily the head coaching position. And so we do work on that in schools as well, is taking those big goals and those big ideas that families have and helping them look through several different perspectives at what might be a good fit. And certainly not limiting the options for the student, because oftentimes I think the idea of making that goal more reasonable, it is perceived that that is lessening somehow the employment opportunity for the student. I I feel like that doesn't happen too much when you have really good communication and collaboration among teams, because as one team member feels that there might be something out there that's really grand, the others are there to help support that idea and work towards it. You know, it's not unusual for Lori to come back and give information to the school district and say, there are these jobs available in the community right now. How can we get to these jobs with the students that we have? And so there's information, that processing of information also includes vocational rehab, letting us know what we can be working on as a school division to get kids prepared for the world of work, because she's certainly more knowledgeable about each of the different jobs that are available in the community, you know, immediately around our schools. So, you know, it's a constant flow of information going back and forth, and in my mind, it is imperative that that communication line stay open, and not just between our two agencies, but also including the county ID case management or supported employment agencies, because without that communication, I don't think that we would be seeing the success that we do for students with autism, also students with any other type of disability. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope that we've been informative.
Thank you.